Welcome to the Leap Health Workplace Podcast. Here we explore innovative, proven health and wellbeing solutions to drive your performance and productivity. Leap Health empowers individuals and organisations to prioritise their health and wellbeing as a catalyst to performance and productivity. We do this by providing workplace health and wellbeing performance workshops and also the Leap 360 one-to-one leadership coaching to drive health, wellbeing and performance, powered by the Game Changer Index Energy for Impact profiling tool. And we offer bespoke corporate programs to ignite proactivity in ownership at all levels of health and wellbeing as a catalyst to performance and productivity. Whether you're sat at your desk right now or on the move, get ready to listen, get ready to invest your time and take action straight after. I'm Anna Reddy. Let's get ready to make small steps to leap health. Today is going to be a super podcast, and this is something I've been looking forward to exploring for a long time, probably from a selfish perspective really, but in terms of how I've had a few rude awakenings over the last year in terms of seeing signs and symptoms of ADHD, which have probably been manifesting for many years. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have the expert on the show today, who is Kate Moryousseff. And I've discovered Kate after I'd listened to a podcast with Lucinda Miller on the Fern Cotton show, and I like what she said. I'm intrigued by nutrition, and she was looking at brain brilliance. So I Googled where I could find her again to listen more. And then I came across Kate Moryouseff's podcast. And since then, I've got obsessed with Kate's episodes. So it was amazing when Kate agreed to join us on the podcast today. So who is Kate? Well, Kate is an ADHD lifestyle and wellbeing coach, and also an EFT practitioner. And this is really fascinating to learn more about EFT and the power that it can have, and hopefully we can delve into that a little bit more today. And she also has the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast as well. So I would really encourage you to visit that. Most importantly, though, she's a busy mum of 4 children, who's also achieving great things as well, and has got so much knowledge, energy, and expertise that she can share with us today around the topic of ADHD. So welcome to the show today, Kate. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for that. Great to be here, and looking forward to our chat.
Definitely. And I've given you a little bit of an introduction there, but I've probably missed out lots. So would you like to tell our listeners a little bit more about who Kate is and how you've got to where you've got to today?
It was a pretty decent intro. I'm quite happy with that. Like you said, I've got 4 kids, and they have all got ADHD in some capacity. I'm from a very neurodivergent family. And I realized I had ADHD at the age of 40 while I was getting one of my children diagnosed. And that was very early stages of the pandemic. And from there, it's kind of just all snowballed, because I was already starting a new career in wellbeing and lifestyle coaching, trained to be a health coach. And I recognized that I wanted to help other women like me who were feeling overwhelmed and exhausted and unfulfilled, and were trying to find like a new version of them, potentially after having children, maybe going into their 40s, maybe starting to feel sort of perimenopausal, like all these different things, but didn't quite have the vocabulary or the understanding of any of this. So much has changed over the past 5 years. So that, my previous career used to be in PR, in consumer PR, which I loved. And as much as I loved it, it also depleted me. And I was very sort of, it kind of drove these perfectionist standards. There was definitely sort of burnout there. There was a lot of anxiety working in that industry. But I also loved it because it could feed my creativity and my innovation, and thinking outside of the box and running with an idea that I'd have like in the middle of the night and seeing it come to fruition and seeing it in the papers, a few days later, and all things like that. So it was fabulous. But I knew that, alongside a family, it wasn't conducive. And I was always really conscious of my well-being. I was always really conscious that if I didn't look after myself way before self-care and mental health and well-being was a conversation that people were having. It was, I was in my sort of late 20s, mid to late 20s. And I really recognized that if I didn't look after myself, I'd feel very off balance, and I'd feel anxious and hypervigilant. And I just never quite understood why I'd feel so restless, but exhausted, and all these different things. So I naturally just had this interest in well-being. And so for me, it was kind of like, once I'd had my kids and I'd had a bit of time off in between them and things like that, I started via another career, which I won't go into, but involves succulents, which is a very ADHD thing, to just have a weird career in between two careers. And I decided then that I was going to train to be a well-being and health coach. But I also wanted to help people with the emotional side, which is when I trained to become an emotional freedom technique practitioner, which is tapping. So I sort of blended, again, in a very ADHD style, which I didn't even know was ADHD at the time, lots of different modalities that I was interested in. It was very non-linear, and it didn't follow a pattern that I could see in anyone else. So I really wanted to be able to help people in lots of different ways. And then when I got my ADHD diagnosis, it was kind of the answer to so many questions that I'd been having, so many questions about myself and my productivity and my brain and my nervous system and my energy and my mood and my hormones and all these different things. And that is when I started to blend what I had already been doing with more of an understanding of ADHD and doing more kind of training and speaking to lots of people, and obviously having so many people on the podcast who I was asking so many questions of, really asking all the questions I needed to know, and for myself and my family. But I thought, well, if I'm asking these questions for me, there's going to be a lot of other people out there that need these answers as well. And that's how the podcast has grown to the way it is. 3 years later, 2.5 million downloads, a book in the making, nearly out. It's just been a bit crazy, but I've loved every minute of it.
Incredible. And all that driven by your passion and your story, and being able to create something that really works for you. There's so many things I love to pick up on in what you've just said. But yeah, thinking, where do I start? But that intrinsic motivation around well-being, I can just so resonate with. I feel like it's music to my ears, what you're saying. And that was one of my rude awakenings. At age 8, I asked Father Christmas for an aerobics video and a set because I got that feeling that it was a really good way to release the energy that I got. I remember being super excited at age 10 when I got an exercise bike in my room. That was not typical behaviour at all. And yet now it all seems to slot into place. And being into exercise and realising that I needed to exercise before it was trendy, when it was totally uncool. Those things all seem to slot into place. And then I love how you're saying you're in that career of PR, really successful, doing loads and loads and loads, but then you recognise that things maybe had to change when you had your family. And I think sometimes when you've got those ADHD tendencies, you perform really, really well professionally, don't you? You have lots and lots of strategies in place, but you're holding it all together so that in your personal life as well, then things have to change a little bit and can slip a bit. So, and then you mentioned the hormones, and we're going to come on to that later. So thank you, Kate, for highlighting all those different areas. I guess a question that a lot of our listeners are wanting to ask or curious about, which a lot of people are right now, is that, as you said, things have changed massively in terms of the area of ADHD in the last few years, and diagnosis is going through the roof, isn't it? It's skyrocketed. I looked at some recent data, and it was looking back in 2018, it was 5% up to around about 14%. It was really, that was in terms of children and adolescents. So the diagnosis is significantly increasing. Waiting lists are growing longer and longer for it. Is it really that it's actually increasing, or is it just that we've got that awareness?
Yeah, well, we've got the awareness. And if you think back, if anyone's listening now and they are thinking, oh, I wonder, or maybe they've got a child that's diagnosed, we need to, remember that incredibly, hereditary. It's probably one of the most genetic conditions going. People say it's along the same lines of how genetic, hair color or eye color is. So there's a very, very, very high chance if you've got a child that's been diagnosed, one of the parents is going to have ADHD. So what we're starting to then understand is that the family members that we may have looked back over the different generations who had mental health problems, who had addiction problems, who really struggled, financially, or they may have never really quite found that career that worked for them. They may have had breakdowns. They may have just socially struggled. There may have been a lot of anxiety, lots of different things that people are then able to say, okay, that person historically, sadly, never got that support. That person perhaps just was looked upon as a bit of an outsider, a bit of I'm going to say in inverted commas, a weirdo or anything like that, anything that didn't conform to the social norms. We can start looking at, like, I wonder if they were neurodivergent. And I'm going to use neurodivergent as sort of the umbrella term because I think it's really important to understand that ADHD and autism, there's a huge overlap. So you can get an ADHD diagnosis, but you will have some autistic traits and vice versa. And the same way, if you've had a dyslexia diagnosis, there's a really high chance there's going to be ADHD there. It's very rare that any neurodivergent kind of diagnosis doesn't come with something else. So I'm hearing a lot of people saying, well, my son's dyslexic or I'm dyslexic, but I've never been diagnosed with ADHD. And it's like, well, actually, we're starting to understand the overlap and we might have different variations. We might be on different spectrums and certain traits might be stronger or less intense, or we might really struggle in one area, but sort of fly in another area. So we've got to stop looking at this as so binary and recognize that that there's probably a lot of different ways neurodivergence can show up. And a huge bugbear of mine is when people say, aren't we all a little bit neurodivergent? And it's like, well, yes, our brains are all different, our wirings are all different. But if it's been persistent, throughout our lives, it's been pervasive, and we have really struggled, we struggled academically, relationships, we've struggled with health issues, mental health issues, we'll go back to addiction, all things like that, hormones, then we'll understand that, yes, it is pervasive and a diagnosis is 100% necessary and valid. But if you're the type of person that, I'm going to say in inverted commas, a little bit forgetful or scatty, but on the whole, life has been fine. You've things have been okay. Is a diagnosis necessary? Maybe not. Maybe you're okay. Maybe there is a touch of ADHD, and maybe society at the moment is kind of, I would say, tweaking our brains a little bit towards this sort of fast-paced information. We're all phone addicted. I don't know one person that isn't sort of constantly checking their phones. So we're having a shift in our neural wiring, I think, in that our brains are going to be more inclined to want things quickly and we get bored easily. But if that's the only thing that's showing up for you, then no, you don't have ADHD. But if there are other things like sleep issues, anxiety, OCD, mood irregularities or dysregulation, things like that, then yeah, it's really important that you get that help and that, that support. And maybe a diagnosis is very important so you can get the medication perhaps that you need, or you get the therapeutic help and the support or coaching or accommodations at work. Very, very important.
Yeah, and I think, like you said in your introduction, it was quite liberating to know what it was and to really understand yourself. Yeah, I know with my experience with my daughter who's diagnosed with dyslexia, maybe, I don't know, 9 years ago, the school said, don't tell her because she'll play on it. Just don't tell her she's got it.
Wow.
And I pondered on that for a couple of weeks, and then I had this awful feeling thinking, she's sat in class thinking that, there's something wrong with her and she doesn't know what it is. Whereas once you can actually understand how you can be at your best, and understand what your challenges are going to be, but put strategies in place, it is quite liberating, isn't it? And it's just about really understanding yourself, and as a parent to be able to empower your children to do that as well.
It's really upsetting to hear that, actually, because, you know, for someone to say, don't tell her what's wrong, and she'll sit there and go, well, I'm clearly stupid. There's something, you know, like I can't, you know, write the way, you know, read or process the information or concentrate the same as other people. So, you know, the dyslexia, I mean, I was listening to an amazing podcast the other day with Jo Malone, who is severely dyslexic, and what a businesswoman, you know, entrepreneur, you know, created $1 billion business, sold it. I know she's had lots of issues with sort of trademarks and copyrights, and she's lost the use of being able to use the name Jo Malone, but she started again and she's rebuilt. And all of this is, you know, she says that she can't read the contracts, she can't fill in forms, and she's had to build a team around her. But actually, all the strengths that's what's brought her success, you know, like her neurodivergent brain, and also her sensory output, you know, using her nose and smell is what's created. And she's been able to use her creativity as her driver. But, you know, she said if it wasn't for her dyslexia, she doesn't think she'd have the brain to create what she's created. So it's actually so important that we get this validation, and we get this acknowledgement that yes, our brains are like this, we will struggle with certain things, but actually let's use it to an advantage and get support for the things that really, you know, we struggle with.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many inspirational people out there, isn't it, that we can use examples of where they've actually utilised the superpowers. But it's being able to lead and have that, you know, that trust in other people. And that's often what neurodivergent people are good at doing, isn't it, in terms of building those connections so that they can use the strengths of other people. When you were talking then about, like, is it actually ADHD or is it not, and how it manifests in our world now, I'm just going to put on that in terms of, like, you've mentioned the sleep, and I've just listened to a wonderful podcast that you've done around sleep, but how our world as it's designed now is not really supporting those areas. So in terms of devices late at night, that can maybe increase the symptoms of ADHD in terms of people not being able to sleep. So we need to really dig down to understand what's actually causing it, and is it the stimulus that's in our life. So yeah, thank you for that. You mentioned that all your children have got ADHD. I know mine have got one that's currently being assessed, dyslexia. But sometimes it's when they're being diagnosed that you have this a bit of a realization that you're quite the same as them. And like you said, there's a big genetic component. It's got to come from somewhere. So, you know, how do you think this is showing up as well? And you know, what are the signs and symptoms to be looking out for?
Yeah, so interestingly, so when I started on this journey, it was just one of my children that I was looking for diagnosis, even though I could, you know, in hindsight spot it, you know, in them. And you know, having 4 kids with ADHD, and now we realize that my husband has definitely got it as well, and perhaps has it probably a little bit more severely than I do, but because he just wasn't looking for it, and it hadn't really sort of, he maybe created scaffolding. He has to exercise a huge amount, and when he doesn't exercise, he can feel, you know, sort of antsy, and, you know, he struggled with sleep and things like that. So, but he's understanding it now from a completely different, you know, perspective, and actually I think he's quite grateful to have that recognition. So now that we know that both of us have got it, but very differently, we kind of understand why we've created 4 children with it, and 4 of them all shows up differently. And that's what's so important, because one person's ADHD will never look the same as another, which is why when people just kind of go, oh, well, you don't look like you've got ADHD, or your house is really tidy, or you're really successful at work, or you don't have, you know, this problem or that problem, how can you have ADHD? It can show up so differently. And I'm not going to go into all the different traits of my children, because that's their business. But all I can say is that they offer me the insight of that full spectrum of, you know, one being a bit more inattentive, and one having a little bit more anxiety, one having a little bit more of the OCD tendency, one needing to burn off a lot of restless energy, one struggling with sleep, one struggling with sort of the more fatigue side of it as well. So it's like two completely different ends. So we have to just, you know, if you've got a child and you are, you know, suspecting, it's so important to do that research and to understand it from their perspective, and not be dismissive, and be open-minded and get curious, ask them questions. And if you've got a child that perhaps has struggled academically, or gets into trouble at school, or has the same thing that the teachers are saying of, he doesn't hand his homework in on time, or they're disruptive in class, or they could do better, they're not reaching their potential, like all these little indicators, instead of going straight down that kind of like getting angry, punishing, you know, that type of thing, is like, ask them, like, what is it? Are you struggling in class? Is it hard for you to concentrate? Do you feel like you're not able to retain or process the information? You know, ask them, because we are our best, you know, we are our own experts. And we always know how we feel, but we will have been told, or maybe felt shame, or masked, you know, a huge amount, especially girls mask ADHD to try and, you know, people please, or to fit in, or to ensure that no one can quite see where, you know, they're dropping the balls and stuff. So I think, you know, as parents in this day and age, we are better equipped with information, and we're better equipped with knowledge and resources that we can, instead of going straight down that discipline route of like, you know, how can we help you? How can we support you? And I think then we'll start seeing this flourishing and this way of kids, instead of, you know, them losing out on their potential and leaving school, or finding their way into sort of, you know, like criminal activity or all sorts of things. It's like, actually, let's nurture and help them and find their strengths. And so, you know, they can thrive and actually feel good about themselves and boost their self-esteem, which is so important.
Yeah, and imagine your kids being able to walk straight into a job after education and being like, right, I've got these superpowers. These are how they work. This is where I'm gonna take your business to the next level. Don't put me in these areas, because these are not my areas. I don't enjoy it, and they're not my areas that I want to work in.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
By empowering them when they're really young, and I think, you know, as a parent, we've probably got that duty, haven't we, to really dig deep and reveal things while we can, and doing it as early as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely enabled, because once you get to the teenage years and there's hormones in place and they're not always thinking that logically, and I guess that's when the symptoms can get exacerbated as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then it's good to have that really early intervention. And then you're from a parent's, I don't know about if you see this or not, but sometimes the frustrations in your kids are because maybe you're frustrated with yourself because you do that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, 100% for sure. Yeah.
It's often easy to criticize other people, isn't it? And then you realize, actually, it's because I do this and I get cross with myself.
Totally. Yeah, the kids are always our mirrors, for sure. They always, I mean, I have one child in particular who is very similar to me, and I see some of the things that they do, and I'm like, no, I don't want them to do that, because it's really annoying for me, and I want them to have like a better quality of life, maybe, you know, than I did at that age. But we also have to recognize that, you know, these kids have to kind of find their own path a little bit, and we can't fix everything for them. And we have to kind of let them, in a way, find out what makes them tick as well, and help them, you know, do that. So support them to find their path. But, you know, what I hear, this very sort of consistent message of many of my clients who are only being diagnosed later on in life, you know, their 40s and their 50s, 60s, you know, 70s as well, is that they didn't feel heard or seen or validated, and they felt like they were always less than, and they were shamed for who they were, and they wonder, what if I could have been more of myself, but what if I could have been more authentic? Or what if I didn't choose that subject because I thought I should have taken that subject or done that profession, and kind of went with my gut. But at the time, no one was doing that, or I was told that you don't make money doing that, or that's not a proper profession to go into, or all these different stories that we may have been told by our parents, who were probably more in survival mode than we were more sort of, they were at that beginning stages of trying to, make sure that we are, financially secure and all these different things. So yeah, it's very much kind of like, are we able to nurture our kids and nurture their talents and strengths, but also let them have a bit of space to make decisions for themselves? I don't know. I'm figuring this out as a mum as well, so I don't have the answers, but I'm just wondering if that's possibly that maybe a different angle that we can take now.
Yeah. I think that's right. Just giving them the confidence to be who they want to be. And I loved how you said a bit about feeling heard, because as humans, we all want to feel heard, don't we? And if we don't feel heard, it can really compromise our well-being, lots of and our confidence as well. So being able to really talk to kids and let them feel like they're heard and understood is critical. So just kind of delving a bit deeper into this, we've said it's genetic, so there are lots of households where the parents got ADHD and the kids have got ADHD, and you're trying to juggle it all together. Have you got any like really top tips, any key actionable tips, like practical steps during the day that you do, maybe things like getting out of the house in the morning to get to school, and getting them to bed, things like, have you got any really good top tips that you can share with us?
Listen, all these things, these are great practical tips. And, ADHD or not, we are probably seeing a society where women are more stretched than ever before. We are, working harder. We are still doing so much of the parenting duties, this kind of balance between, parents, especially if you're in sort of a traditional male-female relationship, is still not, no matter how kind of, progressive and woke we all think we're becoming, actually, women are still picking up most of the household duties, and thinking about all the many things that come with, being a parent, like doctor's appointments and WhatsApp groups and kids' birthday parties and homework and all sorts of different things and health stuff. And so we have to kind of almost recognize the pressure that we are under, and give ourselves lots of self-compassion and a lot of grace. Because I think we're trying to do an impossible job, hence the reason why there's so much burnout. I'm seeing that women are striving to have these amazing careers, and why shouldn't we? But it's at this expense of our health, our sleep, our well-being, our mental health, so many different things. So I would just say, let's just try and show ourselves a bit of self-compassion for sure. But from sort of like a well-being perspective, I would say, and I'm going to speak to women here especially, is that our regulation really, really matters. And so if we are the regulators in the house, both parents should be 100% if we're living, with both sets of parents. But if we are the regulators, then we have to look after ourselves. So when our children are in the house, we are feeling that it's harmonious, there's equilibrium, it feels like there's balance, like our mood isn't all over the place. And what we do know is that a lot of people who are being diagnosed later on in life probably have dysfunctional, chaotic households, because they would have had a neurodivergent parent who wouldn't have been able to understand their mood regulation, or why they were felt so easily irritated and flew off the handle, and anger and temper problems and all sorts of things. And so it's our duty to look after ourselves so we can have more harmony in the house, and so our kids feel safer, and it just feels like a bit more of a haven. So what we need to do is prioritize our own well-being. And that is, get outside, go and have a walk, make sure that you're prioritizing your sleep and your nutrition, and you are prioritizing your stress management, and doing things like connecting with friends and joy and creativity. all these things that we think we're too busy for, but actually, you know, these are the things that keep us grounded, and these are the things that help us thrive in our careers and help us have, you know, healthier relationships and better connection with our children. So it all starts from us, and all of it starts from like, how can I look after myself better? And that is where I would begin, for sure. You know, it's not selfish to start prioritizing that. It's essential, actually.
Yeah, and this is music to my ears. Yeah, fasten your own seatbelt first, because you can't help other people, can you, unless you're prioritizing your well-being. And just to add to that as well, whatever you're doing now, even if your kids aren't really mentioning what you're doing, you are leading by example. And when they get to the stage when they're older, they will remember, oh, you know, what actually happened in my house, and remember the strategies that you'd put in place as well. So I think even if you think that they're not noticing what you're doing, you probably are leading by example. And just another thing I was going to pick up on then, because I did want to ask your opinion on this. We talk a lot about ADHD being very genetic, but then there's lots of people talking about it being your life experiences as well. What percentage would you say the makeup of that is?
So what we understand about ADHD is that it is genetic, but it can lie dormant for very different, you know, varying reasons. So you could have, you know, a really calm, lovely childhood. You could have had stability. You could have had really sort of you just felt very sort of grounded and well supported and looked after. You could have gone to a school that prioritized, you know, different types of learning, outdoor learning. You may have been an athlete. You may have been able to channel your ADHD into exercise. But what we know is that epigenetics come into play. And that can be all sorts of things. It can be stress, it could be trauma, it could be something that changes in our environment. Very often we're seeing women, especially later on in life, who with perimenopause and hormones, or a divorce or a death in the family, or a change in financial circumstances, like extra stress that's been put on them. And the wheels that they've sort of just been managing to keep on all fall off. And all of a sudden the ADHD kind of like flies up and hits them in the face, and they kind of go, where has this come from? You know, I knew I was always a little bit, you know, scatty, or always sort of was always running late, and I always kind of struggled a little bit to be organized. But all of a sudden these symptoms and traits have just kind of hit me in the, you know, the face of the sledgehammer. So this is why we are seeing much later diagnoses of women, because we know that ADHD is very much hormone driven. Because when our estrogen, I'm going to say this very sort of simply, but when our estrogen levels drop, our estrogen is very much connected with dopamine. And so when estrogen drops towards the end of our cycle from ovulation onwards, we feel this drop in dopamine, which very often means that we have low mood, low motivation, difficulty in sleeping, organization, executive functioning, all these different things which are sort of very much part of the ADHD model. And we could be like, well, I was fine 2 weeks ago. What has happened now? But as we're getting older and our hormonal fluctuations are becoming more kind of obvious and more persistent, then we start kind of going, oh, okay, there's something going on here. But a lot of girls, I know ADHD girls also struggle more with PMS and PMDD. They may also suffer more with just more kind of like women's health issues, such as endometriosis or PCOS. We're seeing just a higher rate of anything sort of hormone, women's health driven with neurodivergent, you know, women, girls, migraines, gut problems, hypermobility. So, you know, the past few episodes of my podcast have been very much focused on the mind, the brain-body connection of ADHD, that it's not just what's going on in our head. It can have a huge impact. You know, we know that a lot of people with ADHD suffer with chronic pain, fibromyalgia, like I say, hypermobility, Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. And we need more research, but we are getting the doctors, finally, the psychiatrists, the researchers who are committing to recognize that this is an all body all-encompassing experience. And we're really only at the very beginning of this. You know, we are waiting for more research to come out, but it is coming, thankfully. And there's amazing people who are, you know, spearheading this, and they're going to be they've been on the podcast, they're coming back on the podcast. And that is my sort of driver, is to ensure that people understand that, you know, if you have suffered with all these different things and you've kind of been a bit like, oh, you know, maybe I wonder if there is ADHD or autism there, then you're going to get that validation. And it's really, really important.
Exciting. And yeah, I did listen to a recent podcast. Was it Dr. James Custon that was on your podcast?
Yeah, James Custon.
I would recommend anyone to go and listen to that, but that was really looking about that somatic approach. And it's like anything, isn't it? We can't treat anything in isolation. So, and we talk about physical and mental health, and actually they're very, very interlinked, aren't they? When I do nutrition workshops, I'll always start with support your mind, because then your physical benefits come from fueling your mind first. And years and years in the pharmaceutical industry, we used to drive those connections between different things. When all departments in the hospital work in isolation on one thing, we'd be like, look at it together. For instance, you know, asthma and allergic rhinitis. For years and years, they were just separate things, whereas we know now that they're really linked together. And I think that is the way that the world is fortunately going, isn't it? It's not just look at one thing at a time. We're looking at a multiple approach of different things, which is the way that we do need to go.
Yeah. And actually what's really interesting, I think 100% all of that. And in that podcast with Dr. James Custo, we sort of talked about inflammation and lots of inflammatory markers. And, you know, there's this hypothesis of we are sort of living in quite a stress-induced body, nervous system, for very varying different reasons. And if we can bring down the cortisol and we can bring down the inflammation and we can help with our stress, it then helps us reduce the different symptoms that we're finding really kind of challenging with ADHD. So that is why I sort of always talk about, you know, like finding ways to calm your body and calm your mind, calm your nervous system, because when we are feeling more grounded and we are feeling kind of more balanced, then we're able to manage these ADHD symptoms better. And I see this a lot, you know, with women, especially if they've worked in the corporate environment, they're burnt out, they're exhausted, they're, you know, surviving on caffeine and surviving on sort of like 5 or 6 hours sleep a night. They're not getting outside, you know, in daylight. They're not outside in nature. They're not moving their bodies. They're not doing, you know, things like yoga or mindfulness. But when they do, they start noticing what a massive impact it's having on them, and that ripple effect. So it's very much kind of almost like peeling everything back and just like just do some simple things to help calm your body and bring in more of this sort of like this stress relief, this lowering the inflammation in our body. Because, you know, if you do suffer from things like gut problems or you know, chronic pain, endometriosis, yes, we may need Western medicine. There may be pharmaceuticals that we might have to bring in, but hopefully not for a long period of time. And we can look at stress management as a long-term approach and the pharmaceuticals as a short-term approach. That's that's what I would love to see.
Definitely. There's a lot of talk around inflammaging as well, isn't there, at the moment? In terms
I love that, inflammaging. I've not heard that.
Yes. I've heard it from Dr. Louise Newson, who is a pioneer in terms of menopause.
Yeah.
But yes, maybe something to look out for.
Can I actually also mention about the menopause and perimenopause is that what we do know, and again, this is coming from research from Dr. Coy, who is based in Holland, Dr. Sandra Coy, and she's done a huge amount of work on hormones and ADHD and perimenopause, but also on sort of cardiac health as well, which is connected to sort of the stress relief and, you know, reducing cortisol. But what we do know is that ADHD women, especially, and autistic women, are probably starting perimenopause earlier. We're noticing perimenopausal symptoms earlier, and it's more pervasive. It's more difficult for us to manage. It's not kind of just, we don't glide through perimenopause. which is again why we're seeing a lot of women who are just like, I was coping before, but I cannot cope now. And HRT, if you are able to take it, I know I sort of said about pharmaceuticals and stuff, but actually HRT for me has been a game changer. And I went on it at the age of 41. I've not looked back. It's been incredibly helpful. And I would say for me, that is one of the key ways I manage my ADHD, and it helps my sleep. And it helps my mood and my cycle and all sorts of things that I was really, really struggling with. So it's really important to do that research, have a listen to the podcast episodes. We've got quite a lot of them, 3 or 4 different doctors, all talking about ADHD and hormones and perimenopause, and understanding our cycles and all things like that. I mean, it's a huge topic of conversation. It's really important that women understand it as well.
Yeah, I can echo exactly what you say there, that yeah, HRT has really been beneficial for myself as well. But I think this is where, again, with the ADHD tendencies, we're in a good place because we quite like to do things a little bit different. We're quite, let's just do it, have the guts to do it, and curious. So probably you, like myself, have really looked into it a lot, really understood the data around the cardiovascular benefit, the osteoporosis, your mental health and everything, and understood that data. Obviously, it's not suitable for everybody, but this key message, empowering yourself to understand yourself, to know if it's suitable for you. You really do have to dig deep to understand yourself, but you also have to be quite clear when you go to your healthcare professional, go to the right person, that you get what you need. And I know, because I've done a lot of data research behind it, I was quite clear in terms of what I wanted, and I'm confident that I'm on the right thing. But women need to be aware and be informed of that. So thank you for that. And obviously, with ADHD being a hormonal thing as well, then it makes sense, doesn't it, that HRT would respond well. So we talked a little bit then about the corporate world. So I work a lot in the corporate world. That's my world in terms of delivering health solutions in the corporate world. What key challenges do you think women with ADHD can face in the corporate world?
I think probably burnout, I would say, is probably the biggest, challenge I'm seeing. A lot of my clients have worked in the corporate world. Many of them are disillusioned by it. Many of them who are understanding themselves and understanding how unwell they felt for so long, really sort of chasing this big career that, yes, may have brought them a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment, but it's impacted their relationships, it's impacted parenting, it's impacted their health, most importantly. And they're kind of thinking, is it worth it? Is it worth it? And what I'm hearing a lot of is, I need to be able to break these burnout cycles. And for me, it's very hard when I'm working full-time in a corporate, job. And I'm then coming home and doing everything for kids and parenting and all the other responsibilities. And I want to see my friends. The quality of life needs to get better for women to be able to stay and sustain corporate careers and be healthy at the same time. And I love it when women who, are hugely ambitious and have incredible brains and want to make change and want to do amazing things in the world, and they can manage this. But most of the time, I don't know if I'm right here, but most of the time I'm speaking to women who are just struggling and holding on by a thread. And it shouldn't have to be, how can we try and make it both, that women can feel this, career satisfaction and feel fulfilled and feel like they're doing something that's really worthy of their time, and still have, their health, and they can have time, and they've got time for themselves, and they don't feel that they're under this sort of, back-breaking pressure. So I would say that it's a very tricky one, because, a lot of people are very need to work. They need the income. And, for me to sort of say, oh, in this idealistic world, give up your job and start a yoga business or do, a retreat business, whatever, that feels good to you. But actually, so much of setting up on your own and being an entrepreneur and building a business from scratch is exhausting and draining as well. And just as stressful, but in a different way. And we have to kind of almost break down those taboos and those stigmas of, I've never had to be on social media before, and driving SEO to my website and finding new clients and creating this whole new brand. And what happens if I don't want to be the face of the brand, and all these different things. And some women kind of try that and then realize it hasn't lived up to what they wanted to do, and they go back to working, in a corporate setting. So what I would love to see is that corporate life is more accommodating to women, neurodivergent women, women who are going through perimenopause. So we're retaining this amazing talent and allowing women to make choices and it feel like they have more autonomy, I would say, in what they want to do. And they're not being forced to kind of do things that make them ill. So it shouldn't be that sort of binary, should it? That's like either quit your job or be in a corporate setting and have burnout. But we need to be able to find a balance. And I'm not saying no job is perfect. No situation is perfect. But to be able to navigate the waves in a way that feels sustainable, as opposed to sort of like huge crashes and then massive highs and all of that. So yeah, I think there's still a lot more work that we need to be doing in this area, I would say.
Thank you. Yeah, some really interesting points there, definitely. And isn't it strange that we're all thinking the same thing as women? We're all thinking the same thing, and yet we're not all always saying it. And maybe we just need to be a little bit braver and say those things. And you're straight away, when you understand someone else is in a similar situation, you warm to them straight away, don't you? And you have that connection. Just being kind to each other, I guess.
Being honest as well, being open and honest, and almost like dropping the guard and the vulnerability, being a bit more vulnerable. And especially if you're a woman leading a team of other women, and maybe you can see that version of you, 10 years ago, where you're juggling small kids and racing, from nursery drop off and racing, to pick up. I never forget that anxiety of, I'm going to be late for work and I'm going to be late for my kid and my kid's ill and I've got to be in a presentation and all of these things, and just feeling this constant anxiety of I'm never doing enough. I'm never good enough for my kids. I'm never good enough for work. Something always has to give. And for me, I wanted to be there. My kids, I wanted them to be my priority. So it was difficult, but that also comes with privilege and so many different things. And it's just so many different nuances to the conversation. So yeah, I think it's just honesty and openness and being able to have that conversation so women feel more supported.
Absolutely. And for your perspective, knowing who you are, and if you have got that ADHD, to really understand who you are helps you to be that authentic, confident self. So, okay, I'm really conscious of your time. And we're going to be drawing to a close soon, but there's just still a couple of things that I've got to get out of you.
Okay.
I've got to ask you. So let's have a think. What are going to be the key things? I think this is really important. How can women with ADHD leverage their unique super strengths, such as, which you mentioned earlier on, that creativity, that problem solving, so that they can excel in their careers?
Yeah. Listen, I'm a huge fan of coaching. I think coaching and mentoring, anything like that, where you are being supported and someone has got your back, someone's cheerleading you, helping you see things that you can't see, different perspectives, guiding you to make decisions that feel more authentic, I would say is a huge thing. So if you've got that opportunity and you're feeling a bit lost and you are feeling like you're not, those strengths aren't being leveraged and they're not being nurtured, perhaps speak to a coach or a mentor at work and see what's possible. I think we've got this access to work option now after a diagnosis. It's not a perfect solution in any way. The waiting time is ridiculous and it's very hard to get in touch with them. But when the funding comes through and you're able to access coaching, I've really seen incredible results from, amazing people who just didn't quite know that their strengths were that strong. And they were focusing more on their self-criticism and focusing all on the things that they can't do, which was just, this never-ending cycle. So I think coaching for sure is a really great option.
Yeah, and often it just gives us that clarity, doesn't it? After we've spoken through it with someone, it provides a clarity that we just can't get ourselves. And as you said, everyone needs a cheerleader to give them that oomph and that motivation to be at the best. Yes, yes. Dig out your cheerleaders. So really nearly there. You mentioned waiting lists on the NHS, big issue in terms of increased diagnosis. What can people do if they're stuck on that waiting list? What could they do?
Yeah, I think, these waiting lists aren't going anywhere until we're getting, better trained professionals, more people understanding ADHD, it being seen throughout different health modalities as well, in addiction clinics, eating disorder clinics, therapists and psychologists are able to understand it and signpost people. So we're still quite far behind. And what I would say to people is that you don't need an official diagnosis to get the help and support and to seek out that help and support, which is why my podcast, it's free, it's there. Go and listen to the podcast, because this is an ideal incubator. This is a space where you can understand so much about yourself, read more, learn more, dig out the articles, other podcasts, read, from the experts, because so much about ADHD is helping ourselves and understanding ourselves. Yes, medication can be incredibly helpful for many people. And that is the problem. You can't get the medication without the diagnosis, but pretty much you can do everything else without the diagnosis. And also, I think, to ask for accommodations at work, from what I know, and to get that support at work, a self-diagnosis is valid. You are able to go to your, the person, HR or whatever, people manager, and say, I suspect I've got ADHD and I've done an online test, and, I believe that this is how it's impacting me, and I would love some help and support. They have to give you that help and support. I've got a book coming out as well. The pre-sale is coming out at the end of Feb. It's called the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Toolkit. So that's out at the end of February, and then you can pre-order it. It'll be out. Launch date is the 3rd of July. But I've written this book specifically for women who have been late diagnosed. It's a toolkit, and it means that you're able to literally open it up wherever you are, and get that help and get that guidance and support if you are struggling that day. Or you can read it all in one go and just be like, oh, finally I'm getting tips and advice and practices and tools that I've been desperate for. So anything with regards to, sleep and fulfillment and connection and hormones, movement, stress relief, all these different things that I've been talking about throughout this conversation, I've tried to condense into a very practical book that's easy to read and dig in and, dive into and then dip in and out of. So you don't have to wait. And then obviously we've got private diagnoses, which are just as valid. And so many of the doctors that are working in the NHS are also working privately. So I think there's been a lot of kind of stigma around, it's not a valid diagnosis if you go privately. It is. So if you are able to afford it, and that is something that you want, the waiting lists aren't that long there. But I know that for a lot of people, it's a huge cost. So yeah, there's options out there, but unfortunately, we are seeing these huge waiting lists still on the NHS.
Amazing. Couple of key things I heard there. I'm just going to repeat these so that this information is absorbed. Don't sit on it. Don't do nothing. Empower yourself. You can self-diagnose and go to your employer and let them know. However, what would be a really good option is to be solution focused. We know in organisations, they don't just you're telling them what the problem is, be solution focused as well. Kate's book would be perfect solution to that. And I would envisage that this book is not just for women who think they've got ADHD. This can be for other people in the workplace, maybe for managers, for HR leaders who want to understand it better so that they can really bring out the superpowers of the valuable talent in the organisation. This just leads me to say a huge thank you to Kate for your time, expertise, insights. It's been really, really enjoyable and interesting. Thank you, Kate. And anything else that you want to leave our listeners with about where they can find you, or any closing remarks from yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I've loved this conversation, really enjoyed it. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to my website, adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk. The podcast is ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast. You can probably just search that anywhere and you'll be able to find, I've got lots of resources on my website, free and on-demand workshops and courses. So I've also got a 12-week coaching container program for a very small amount of women that I'm starting at the very beginning of March. And yeah, my main aim is to help and empower and support women who are ready for change, who are ready for solutions, and to really make that change now that they have an understanding of their brains, later on in life. So yeah, very excited for this year. There's a lot of exciting things to come. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Super. Thank you so much, Kate. Loved it. Thank you. So before you stop listening, I want you to pause. What did you take away from the podcast today? What small steps will you start? And what did you hear that could help someone else to make small steps to lead their health, well-being, productivity and performance? Please do share this episode and please subscribe to the podcast. And remember that Leap Health are here to provide workplace, health, well-being and performance workshops, one-to-one coaching and bespoke corporate solutions to help the world make small steps to leap health, well-being, productivity and performance. Please do get in touch. It's Anna at leaphealth.co.uk. Have a great day.